200,000 people evacuating in the dark. That's the opening line of the story of California's dam disaster. Oroville's damage puts 200,000 at risk. And on February 12, 2017, at 2 a.m., that risk became real. Oroville Dam, 770 feet tall, the tallest dam in the entire United States, was failing. Not gradually, in real time. The main spillway, the structure designed to handle overflow, had cracked. That crack had been reported to regulators by environmental groups back in 2005. Reported, documented, known, and completely ignored for 12 years. When heavy rains hit Northern California in February 2017, that old flaw didn't just reappear, it exploded. The spillway collapsed. Engineers were forced to use the emergency spillway for the first time ever. Within hours, it started eroding. Chunks of concrete washing away. If that emergency spillway weir failed, if it gave up under the pressure, nothing would stop an uncontrolled wall of water from rushing down the Feather River Valley. 200,000 people downstream, multiple communities in the direct path. A disaster that would have reshaped California. And for 4 terrifying days in February, that scenario was genuinely possible. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with heavy rain in 2017. It started years earlier, with a dam that was aging, a problem that was warned about, and a system that chose to look away. Oroville Dam was completed in 1968. That makes it 56 years old at the time of the crisis. It was built to hold back the Feather River and create a massive reservoir called Lake Oroville. This dam wasn't built just for flood control. It was built for water storage, for power generation, for feeding California's thirst. Lake Oroville is part of the State Water Project, the system that supplies water to 27 million people across California. 27 million. That's nearly 3/4 of the state's entire population depending on this one reservoir system. Imagine 27 million people depending on one dam. Now imagine that dam starting to fail. The size of that number is the size of the disaster. Because when engineers talk about dam failure, they're not talking about a small flood. They're talking about a catastrophic release of water that would move like a moving mountain down a river valley. In 2005, the first warning came. Environmental groups flagged a concrete defect in the main spillway. The spillway itself is massive. It's the concrete structure that lets excess water escape from the lake during heavy rains. Without it, water backs up, pressure builds, and the dam becomes unstable. Think of it like this. The spillway is the outlet. The dam is the bathtub. If the outlet is broken and the bathtub keeps filling, eventually the water overflows. And when a bathtub the size of a small ocean overflows, everything downstream gets destroyed. The flaw was documented. It was specific. It was reported to regulators at the California Department of Water Resources. And the response was the kind of response that haunts every engineer and every scientist who studies infrastructure failures. They said they would monitor it. Monitor, not fix. Monitor. For 12 years, that crack existed in the records. It was there in databases. It was known to the people managing the dam. And nothing happened. No repairs, no urgency, no sense that this was a time bomb sitting in Northern California. Water kept flowing behind that dam. Pressure kept building every year. The concrete kept degrading. Environmental groups continued to raise concerns. Scientists wrote papers. And the state kept operating the dam as if everything was fine. Some people at the Department of Water Resources knew. Some engineers knew. But knowing and acting are different things. The repairs never came. The fix never happened. The problem was documented, filed, and essentially forgotten until it became impossible to ignore. Then came January 2017. Atmospheric rivers, those massive rivers of moisture that form over the Pacific and slam into California, hit the state hard. Not once, multiple times. Weeks of heavy rain. Rain that turned streams into rivers, that filled lakes, that overwhelmed drainage systems. Lake Oroville started rising. It filled past 90% capacity. It kept climbing. By early February, the lake was at maximum capacity and still rising. Water was about to spill over the top of the dam itself, which is a catastrophic situation. Engineers had to open the spillways to release excess water. They opened the main spillway, the one with the 2005 flaw. The concrete that had been cracking for 12 years was about to get its real test. It did not pass. Almost immediately, as water rushed through it, engineers spotted a problem. Not a hairline crack, a significant flaw. Concrete was failing. A hole was opening up. Water was carving a path through the structure. The damage was worse than anyone had anticipated. Within hours, the main spillway was deemed unsafe. They had to shut it down, stop using it, cut off their primary way to release water from a lake that was still rising due to incoming rain. This is where the crisis shifted. This is where a known problem became an emergency. Because if you can't use the main spillway, you have one backup: the emergency spillway. Now hear this clearly. The emergency spillway had been part of Oroville Dam's design since 1968. It was never supposed to be used under normal circumstances. It was the last resort overflow, a concrete weir designed to handle water only if the main spillway failed or became unusable. And in 50 years, it had never been activated, never been tested under real conditions. Engineers had calculations about how it would perform. They had models, they had theories, but they had no real-world data. In February 2017, that changed instantly. Water started flowing over the emergency spillway for the first time ever. Engineers watched and waited. At first, it seemed to hold. But then they started seeing something deeply alarming: erosion. The spillway wasn't just handling water, it was being carved away by it. Satellite imagery from those days shows what happened next. The concrete weir was eroding, not slowly, visibly, in real time. Chunks of concrete were being undermined and washed away downstream. Soil beneath the spillway was being carved out. And here's the nightmare scenario that engineers could see forming. If the erosion continued, if it undermined the entire weir structure, if that emergency spillway collapsed, then there was nothing left. The lake would keep rising. Water would flow uncontrolled down the Feather River. The dam itself wouldn't fail, but an uncontrolled wall of water would pour through the valley. Uncontrolled, unrestricted. A wall of water carrying debris, tree trunks, boulders, entire sections of riverbanks. It would hit Oroville first, a town of 16,000 people living directly below the dam. Not a village. A real town with schools and hospitals and people. Flattened. Swept away. Then that wall of water would continue down the Feather River Valley, toward Gridley, toward Yuba City, toward Marysville. Communities that exist because of the river, now about to be destroyed by it. The downstream impact would have been historic. Marysville sits at the confluence of the Feather and Sacramento rivers. The Sacramento River Valley is the agricultural heartland of California. Farm communities, rural towns, cities depending on the river for irrigation and power. If an uncontrolled release from Oroville hit that region, the flooding would cascade downstream. It would reach the Sacramento area. Engineers calculated that the flood wave would have been 30 feet tall when it hit populated areas. 30 feet of water, moving at 50 miles per hour, carrying whatever it encountered. The property damage would have exceeded billions of dollars. The human cost was incalculable. How many lives? Engineers don't like to speculate on those numbers. But when you evacuate 188,000 people, you're tacitly admitting that the death toll if they hadn't evacuated would have been catastrophic. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. We'll never know because evacuation happened. But the potential was there, hanging in the air, for 4 terrifying days. By February 11th, 2017, the situation had become critical. Lake levels were at 205 feet above spillway crest, meaning water was actively flowing over the emergency spillway. Satellite images showed visible erosion. The concrete and soil beneath the weir were disappearing. Engineers were watching their backup system degrade in real time. There was no plan C. There was no other option. If the emergency spillway weir failed, they would need to release water in some other way, and there was no other way. The situation was unambiguous. This dam was in danger, and the communities downstream needed to leave now. At 2 a.m. on February 12, 2017, the state issued a mandatory evacuation order for areas downstream. Not a suggestion, not a warning to be ready. Get out now. Leave everything if you have to, but go. What followed was the largest dam evacuation in United States history. 188,000 people. Think about that number. Not 188,000 houses. People, kids, elderly people, patients in hospitals, residents in nursing homes, all of them flowing out of the valley in the dark. Put it in perspective. 188,000 people is more than the entire population of cities like Salt Lake City or Buffalo. It's roughly the population of Sacramento, the state capital. Imagine evacuating Sacramento in the middle of the night with no warning. Roads were gridlocked. It took hours to move a few miles. There were reports of cars breaking down on the highways. Some people just abandoned their vehicles and walked. Gas stations ran out of fuel. Hotels filled to capacity within minutes. Police and emergency services were everywhere, trying to keep order, trying to make sure nobody was left behind. Nursing homes evacuated in the middle of the night with confused residents who didn't understand why they were being moved at 2 a.m. Hospitals shifted patients to facilities farther away. Schools closed. Businesses shut down. An entire region moved. And the whole time, nobody knew if it would be enough. Nobody knew if they were evacuating far enough or fast enough. Nobody knew if the emergency spillway would hold through the night. The fear was palpable. People were terrified. They were running from something they couldn't see but could imagine. If that just stopped you cold, every subscriber is automatically entered in our monthly hoodie giveaway. Details are in the description. The meteorology was in everyone's favor for one reason only. The atmospheric rivers stopped. The rain ended on February 13th. The storm systems moved away. Lake levels peaked at 205.5 feet above spillway crest. That's just barely below the point where the erosion of the emergency spillway would have become catastrophic. Engineers later calculated that if the rain had continued for 6 more hours, if those atmospheric rivers had shifted slightly inland instead of heading out to sea, if the lake level had risen another foot or two, the narrative changes completely. The emergency spillway weir fails. Water pours uncontrolled down the valley. The evacuation becomes a tragedy. Hundreds of people who got away end up not getting far enough. Entire communities are destroyed. The disaster becomes something that reshapes California. But it didn't happen. The rain stopped. The water level peaked just below the threshold. And Oroville became a near miss instead of a catastrophe. This near miss should have triggered immediate accountability. It should have sparked investigations about why a problem reported in 2005 was still unfixed. It should have led to a complete overhaul of how the state managed its critical dams. Instead, what happened was more bureaucratic. The State Water Resources Control Board authorized repairs. Engineers went to work on fixing the main spillway. The project took months. It took years. And it cost $1.1 billion. That's the price tag for repairing the damage from that collapsed spillway. And here's what makes that number absurd. In 2005, when the flaw was first reported, the repair would have cost a fraction of that. Maybe tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions at most. But certainly not over $1 billion. The delay, the 12-year delay between the first warning and the crisis, turned a manageable maintenance issue into $1 billion emergency. It turned a fixable problem into a near-catastrophic failure. The repairs continued through 2017 and 2018. New concrete, new reinforcement, new design to prevent the same flaw from developing again. They tested it, they inspected it, they built safeguards, and then they waited. They waited to see if the repairs would actually hold when the dam was tested under real conditions. That test came in 2021, but not in the way anyone wanted. A severe drought hit California. Lake Oroville dropped to 24% capacity, the lowest level since 1977. The repairs went untested. Then came 2022 and 2023. More atmospheric rivers. The lake filled again. In 2023, the repaired spillway had its first real stress test since construction. Water flowed over it. It held. The repairs worked. But every time that lake fills, there's a moment of tension in the offices of the California Department of Water Resources. A moment of wondering if what they fixed is actually fixed. Here's what should terrify you about this story, though. And here's where it stops being about Oroville specifically. Oroville is not unique. It's the one that almost failed and got national attention. But it's not alone. The United States has 15,600 dams classified as high-hazard potential dams. High-hazard potential means that if it fails, loss of life is likely and significant property damage is probable. 15,600 dams. That's not counting smaller dams or dams classified as moderate hazard. That's just the ones where engineers agree that failure equals catastrophe. And here's the part that really matters. The average age of a U.S. dam is over 65 years. 65 years old. That means thousands of dams were built in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Many were built before that. We're talking about concrete structures that were designed for the climate of their era, built with the technology of their era, and now asked to perform in the 2020s. A dam designed in 1966 wasn't built for 2024. It wasn't built for atmospheric rivers that drop a year's worth of rain in a week. It wasn't built for the intensity of storms we're seeing now. It wasn't built for droughts so severe they drop lake levels to historic lows. The infrastructure wasn't designed for the world it now inhabits. In 2021, the American Society of Civil Engineers released an infrastructure report card. They gave U.S. dams a D+ grade, D+. That's one letter above failing. That was 4 years after Oroville. 4 years after California had spent over $1 billion on emergency repairs. 4 years of knowing the system was vulnerable. The assessment cited aging infrastructure, deferred maintenance, underfunded projects, and a massive backlog of repairs. Translation: we're not taking care of this, and we're gambling with millions of lives. The report estimated that to bring U.S. dams into acceptable condition would require investments in the tens of billions of dollars. Tens of billions. And the reality is that funding isn't happening at that scale. States are choosing to patch and monitor instead of replace and rebuild. We're gambling that older dams will hold, and they're starting to fail. Dam failures in the United States are accelerating. Over 200 dams have failed in the past decade. 200. Each one smaller than what Oroville could have been, but each one a warning sign. In 2023, the Spencer Dam in Nebraska failed during floods. It's a relatively small dam on the Platte River, but its failure displaced people, damaged property, and demonstrated that even smaller dams can't always withstand modern rain events. The Musselshell River Dam in Montana cracked and threatened complete failure in 2020 during heavy rains. Salmon Creek Dam in Washington State is on the edge of failure due to seepage and structural degradation. The Meadowbrook Dam in New Hampshire failed in 2018. The Camp Creek Dam in Oregon failed in 2017. The list extends back through the years. And with few exceptions, the pattern is the same: older infrastructure, deferred maintenance, a sudden rain event that exceeds the dam's design parameters, and structural failure. What makes this worse is that we don't have comprehensive data on all these failures. Some are documented officially. Many are known only to local communities and local agencies. A small dam fails in a rural area. Nobody in the state capital knows about it. Nobody in Washington, D.C. knows about it. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission tries to track dam failures, but their data is incomplete. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that over 2,000 dams are in poor condition. Over 2,000. And many of those are aging, facing increased precipitation, and not receiving adequate maintenance. We're essentially operating a system of critical infrastructure that we're not maintaining at a level that matches the threats it faces. The climate makes this infinitely worse. We're not just dealing with aging dams in a stable climate. We're dealing with aging dams in a rapidly changing climate. The Southwest is experiencing a mega drought, the worst drought in 1,200 years. That's not a normal dry year. That's a centuries-level climatic shift, and it's happening right now. Lakes that dams create are shrinking to historic lows. Lake Mead, Lake Powell, Lake Oroville, they're all dropping. Water levels are touching lows they haven't touched in decades. But those same regions are also experiencing intense atmospheric rivers and rain events that exceed the dam's design thresholds. A dam designed for a certain range of conditions in 1966 is now facing weather extremes that go beyond that range. Droughts that empty lakes, followed by floods that overfill them. The system is being stressed in ways it was never designed to handle. It's like asking a bridge built in 1966 to handle 3 times the weight it was designed for. It might hold, it might not. You're essentially gambling. And the aging infrastructure can't adapt. It can't be reprogrammed or updated easily. It can only fail or barely hold on. We're gambling with millions of lives based on concrete that was poured 50 years ago. But here's where the story gets truly unresolved, and this is the part that haunts the Oroville situation even after the repairs. If Oroville had failed in 2017, it would have been a regional catastrophe. Oroville is one dam in a system of dams. The State Water Project isn't just Oroville. There are other dams holding back water for California. There's Shasta Dam. There's Don Pedro Dam. There's a whole network of structures, some old, some older, all holding back water. If one major dam fails, could others be damaged by the flood surge? Could that cascade into a system-wide failure? If multiple dams fail simultaneously during a particularly intense atmospheric river, what happens then? The water systems that 27 million people depend on could be compromised simultaneously. Sacramento could flood. The entire Central Valley could become underwater. The agricultural heartland of California, producing a massive percentage of America's food, could be severely damaged. The domino effect would ripple through the nation's economy. And that's not just theoretical. Hydrologists and engineers who study dam failures have said, on the record, that a cascade failure of multiple dams in a system is a real scenario. It's low probability, but it's not impossible. It's not something that can be dismissed. The Oroville crisis in 2017 was actually a test case. It was a chance to see what would happen if a major dam came close to failing. And what happened was chaos, evacuation, economic disruption, and $1.1 billion in repairs. If that happened again with multiple dams simultaneously, the cost and the chaos would scale exponentially. We don't have an answer for that scenario. We have no playbook for managing the failure of 2 or 3 major dams at the same time. We just crossed our fingers, like we did in 2005 when the Oroville flaw was reported, and hoped it wouldn't happen. Oroville Dam is fixed now. The spillway repairs have held through the 2023 floods. Engineers are monitoring it carefully. The concrete is holding. The crisis passed. But the larger question remains completely unresolved. Are we actually prepared for the next crisis? Or are we still just waiting, hoping, and crossing our fingers like we did in 2005? Because here's what we know. More atmospheric rivers are coming. That's not a prediction. That's basic climate science. More droughts are coming. More stress on aging infrastructure. More dams holding back water for populations that are growing and depending on those dams more every year. We learned something from Oroville. We learned that a known problem can explode into a catastrophe if it's ignored long enough. We learned that 180,000 people can be forced to leave their homes in the dark. We learned that $1 billion in repairs is cheaper than the alternative. But we haven't learned enough. We haven't acted on those lessons at the scale required. Most American dams are still aging. Most are still being maintained instead of replaced. Most are still facing a future that is more intense than they were designed to handle. And if this story is a reminder that the infrastructure we rely on every day is more fragile than we think, download our free 72-hour disaster guide. The link is in the description. Oroville is a warning, and warnings, if we don't listen to them, become disasters.